Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming and thanks for staying. I know some of you have been here since the beginning. Very pleased to welcome first and introduce this very esteemed panel. If a bomb dropped on this auditorium today, we'd be in a lot of trouble in terms of performing arts. We're just going to look at, I suppose, two issues. We're going to talk about I suppose, who do we write for? But also, I always thought it was interesting because we always say we come from an oral culture. So if you're a writer, how does that affect you if your culture's oral and the issues and experiences you have trying to turn that into something of the written word? But firstly, let's introduce this amazing panel. I'm so glad you all turned up too. On my far right, the man with the stylish cap on, Mr. Tony Briggs. Tony's obviously been an actor for a long, long time, one of our pioneer actors, Victoria, but also a brilliant writer, playwright, and created this wonderful play called The Sapphires, based on his own mother and aunties, and that's, I think, being made into a film right now, which is pretty exciting. So they've got Brand New Day and we've got The Sapphires. And so please welcome Tony. Next to him, Patrick Mau, from the Torres Strait, hip-hop extraordinaire. And next to him, hip-hop extraordinaire number 2, Mr. Tjimba Possum-Burns, all the way from Chicana. And also, obviously, the founder of the Young Warriors. Next to him, a man that you might know from such shows as I Was a Teenage Aboriginal with Hair, Mr. Richard Frankland, in his very little introduction, playwright, poet, filmmaker, entrepreneur extraordinaire, and political activist. And next to him, our token female for the day. I'm so glad we got Jane, because I was getting a bit worried it was going to be male heavy. Please welcome Jane Harrison, playwright extraordinaire, and playwright of the famous play Stolen, which is just done up the road here, the Mould House, and all over Australia and overseas. So please make the panel welcome. Now, I'm just going to ask a few of them. I won't ask the two boys in the middle because they've just done their half an hour and they've done their performance. But I wanted to ask, firstly, I'll go with Jane on my right. Could you please read us some of your work?
Okay. Well, the piece I'm going to read now, I hope it, just to tell you the background, it is a play called First Contact. So you have to imagine it's 1788, except there's 7 Aboriginal men on stage in suits. So they're the elder statesmen, and they're deciding whether to allow the ships, the 11 ships, to land or not. And of course, because I'm one person, I'm going to read the 7 different roles, so you'll have to just use your imagination. There's 7 different characters. And I'm not going to read the character names. Phew, it's hot, brother. You think there'd be a sea breeze up here? I almost melted getting here. Not a stirring of a breeze. Odd, really. It'll storm later. Yes, the ants were frenzied. The momentous cloud is building. 2 days to get here. Usually takes a few hours. But I avoided the water. Well, I guess that was wise. It's a disruption, a major disruption. Haven't seen you before, you knew. Yeah, filling in for Uncle. So who's your mob? I'm Murawari. Yeah, know that mob. You? I'm Wiradjuri. Okay, the business today is to discuss them lot. Again, for the newcomers here, we sit down here until we all agree on a course of action. That's the protocol. That's civic. It's always worked. So what do you reckon, brother? Did you ever expect to see them back here again? Well, you've got to expect it. It's not the first time. They come, they go, those shiny ones. Yeah, I suppose. Shiny? Under their cloaks they are. Shiny, like the inside of a shell. What's about it, bruz? Not sure, maybe it's the heat. Must be the heat. Elders, let's turn to the business of the day. Right, let's just get on with it. I've got bark for a canoe that's drying out. In this weather, it'll crack. Mr. Chair, start the show. Could you please take your place? We'd like to begin. Oh, apologies. Hey, it's a puzzle, don't you think? Puzzle, it's a waste of time, us even yarning about it. I mean, why would they come back? What do they want? What do they want? Who cares? We're all ready to begin? All here? Nah, Uncle's taking a leak. We're waiting? Sorry. Before we get down to business today, we need to acknowledge country and introduce ourselves. I wish to acknowledge with the utmost respect the land which provides for us, our elders who guide us with their wisdom of the ages, our warriors who defend us, the stories and ceremonies which teach us law. We meet today on the land of the Wurundjeri, and we thank them for the permission to hold this special general meeting. Let's go around and make sure we all know each other. We're happy to speak this common language. We're all familiar with it. Of course. So, you gentlemen can handle it any way you want to. I mean, I'm not going to make any rules. If we want to discuss it first and then vote, that's one way. Or we can vote right now and see how we stand. If there's a quick decision, we can all go home. But first, you've given instruction to your mob that the women are not to approach them, nor the children. How are the women going to fish if they're not allowed out on the water? It's just until they leave. It's not forever. Just not right. They need to fish. That's their business. And our business is to come to an agreement. So let's do it. Let's vote. Sorry, just to clarify, we're voting for... Oh, I'm sorry. For which warriors we'll send down to parry forth? You know, put on a show, scare them off? Oh, yes. Thank you. Some of us have already talked about the best course of action. Really? Too right. Can't we just ignore them? We tried that last time. Okay, is there anyone here who wants to abstain from the vote at this point? All those voting to send a group of men from your mob, raise your hands. 4, 5, 6. That's 6 who vote to prevent them from landing. Okay, for an alternative plan? 1. Right. Okay, 6 to 1. Now we know where we are. Somebody likes to think differently. So what's your alternative plan? I'm not sure. Come on, I never saw a more pathetic mob. Send them on their way. We can go back to our own business. It's hot, it's going to thunder. Let's just get on with it. They look desperate. And that's our problem. How? I don't know. I just think maybe we should be doing something. Look, they're not people we want to associate with. They proved it a dozen times, different ways last time. Do you want me to list them? No? Well, do you believe we should welcome them? Invite them to share turtle? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to believe. So why'd you vote the other way then? There were 6 votes about sending them away. It's not so easy for me to raise my hand and send them off to die without talking about it first. Hold on, to die? Who said they'd die? Take a look at them. Just because I want to send them off, that doesn't mean I want them to die. I just want them to go. You couldn't change my mind if you talked for 100 seasons. I don't want to change your mind. I just want to talk about it for a while. Look, they don't look like they have very good lives. You know, those Nowies, they might be large, but they look like slums. From what I've observed, they don't look like they have any elders on board to guide them. That's not a very good situation. They look pretty unhappy with their lot. I think maybe we owe them a bit more discussion, that's all. I don't mind telling you this, mister. We don't owe them a thing. They've got their big Nowies to sail in, eh? They're fortunate then. They can Nowie somewhere else. Look, we're all senior men here. We've been around. We know things. You're not going to tell us we're supposed to care about them, knowing they're kind. I know they're kind. You can't trust them. I know that, and you know that.
Wow. Can I just quickly ask you, is that a new play in the
It is. It's very early draft.
Fantastic. People think writers are crazy because they talk to themselves. You can do 7 people in your head. That's amazing. And I'd now like to hand over to my esteemed brother, Mr. Richard Frankland, who's going to read some of his work.
This is my respect to the traditional owners and to all of you mob here, of course. This is a new play called Gilbert Mau, which means saltwater man, and it's about, well, this particular part's about, it's a play type of book thing, but it's more a play which could be a film. In other words, I wrote it drunk. It's typhoid, madness, exhaustion, going too far, nearly dead again, crawling, shitting and soldiers. I'm in the doctor's studio. You're sick, he says. I nod. The flu, I reckon? He punches something into the computer and reads for a moment. Your immune system's shot. I nod again. I start sweating again, but I feel cold, bloody freezing. Can you hold that on? I start thinking of another doctor, one I met in San Cristobal, down near the Guatemalan border in Mexico, Chiapas country. I was there with me mate Ralph. We went there with another mate, Justin. Justin's an Australian guy of Irish extraction who's been working with the local Indigenous mob there for years. This was the place that put paid to my immune system. There was a massacre, says Justin. 47 people killed. They cut the fetus out of 5 pregnant women. Who, I ask? The paramilitary, other local mob who were trained up. The mob who were killed were praying when they came. They reckon it's a program the military taught them. What's that, I say? I look over at Ralph and he's watching Justin intently. Kill the seed, says Justin. There was a handbook, apparently. I get typhoid after being there for a couple of days. I reckon I got it in Mexico City. We travelled south to near the southernmost border of Mexico and we stayed near the Chiapas massacre site. We were going to interview people. We go to doctor after doctor to find out what's wrong with me. One bloke we went to gave us a prescription for some tablets and then he sent us to the pharmacy next door. Then he turned from a doctor into a pharmacist and came and served us. I don't reckon he knew what was wrong with me and the tablets did nothing. Then we went to the hospital and there were earnest young doctors there, all worried. Not enough tablets and medication for anyone, they said. There were injured and extremely sick people lying in the hallway. The walls had large cracks in it and the equipment was all old and worn. One bloke was laying on a bed in the hall with a tube in his eye and pus running out. I went back to my room. I didn't reckon I deserved treatment any more than that mob. Justin somehow found a doctor for me. He cost $50 US a visit. Typhoid, he says. Nah, I said, I had the shots. Doesn't matter, he says, typhoid. He gives us a handful of prescriptions and me a handful of temporary tablets. Take these, he said. You're diabetic. A statement more than a question. Yeah, I say. What fucking next, I think. Drink 6 litre of water a day or you die. I nod. Fuck, I think. You shit blood, you die. I'm shitting so much that I reckon I could have blocked Melbourne city sewage twice and still had some to spare. He catches me smiling. You understand? I nod. You shit blood, you die. He says that again to me. Back in the doctors near my hometown, back in Australia, that doctor says, how's your sugar levels? Not sure, I said, I haven't checked for a bit. We need to get your management plan in place. I nod. Kidneys, eyes, circulation, all those things. Sure, I say. And your future management plan. Blindness? I look at him. Happens to diabetics. I shake again and think of lying in a motel for 10 days with typhoid and doctor, you shit blood, you die, coming to see me every other day and wispy, sweet memories of Ralph and Justin popping in to visit. I lost 13 kilos in 10 days, sweating, hallucinating, laughing at myself and shitting. Lots of shitting, cunny everywhere. Sleep, wake up, shovel tablets down my throat, scull a bit of water, freeze, shake uncontrollably, stinking hot shower, crawl to the toilet till I stop shaking, then back to bed, more sleep, until I wake up and I see them. They're sitting on the walls. 4, 5, 6, 20, 30, countless. They're as large as my closed fist, black evil looking bastards of things. Then, as if planned, they take off and fly around the room. I hold the scream back in my throat. Don't acknowledge those fucks, they don't exist. Fuck them. I grab the TV remote and turn the telly up and channel surf. Clint Eastwood, a God botherer program. I slip in a quick prayer. Hey big fella, zap these pricks for me, will you? I risk a glance, but it hasn't worked. Either the big fellas missed them or missed my prayer amidst all the godbotherers asking to win the lotto. I changed the channel. Some guy on telly is trying to win money in a car. I stick with him. Those things are flying flat out now and sometimes diving close to me. Then they land on the walls. The guy on the TV goes for the money again. The things stare at me. I stare at them from the corner of my eyes. I tell myself they don't exist, and they tell me they do. It's a Mexican standoff. I piss myself laughing for a minute, but I have to stop in case I shit myself. Fuck 'em, I think, and I turn off the TV and lay down on my back, sweating and shaking and strangely quiet inside. And then it happens. One of them flies off the wall in almost slow motion and lands on the lower part of my throat. Sorry. Where your head joins your body. It lands heavy and I can feel 8 or 10 or however many fucking legs it has dig in. I want to grab it and throw it off and smash it and smash all its mates and then run screaming down the road to the nearest pub and get gloriously drunk on tequila and pretend that typhoid and big black flying bugs don't exist. But instead I sit up and take a drink. I'm not going to acknowledge this thing because if I do I'm worried I'm just going to go into madness. Fuck you, I think, or say. You don't exist. I drink my water aiming for my daily 6 litres. I take one of my 4 handful of tablets which I regularly take upon waking, in between shitting, showering, crawling, every half hour or hour. Stuff you and your ugly mates, I say, and I settle in for a good bit of typhoidic perception TV, a game show. The doctor back home gives me Keflex, same as I had in Mexico. God forbid, he says. It's something he says a lot. God forbid you don't get too ill, he says. I drive home with my family. My little girl is sick, vomiting. God forbid, I hope she don't see any bugs. So.
Deadly. Thank you very much, Richard. Now, the 2 boys in the middle, they're men really, but I'm just trying to differentiate between the old ones around you and you. No, I'm only joking, Jane. But here's a cat amongst the pigeons question. Have any of you writers ever tried to write music? And have any of you musicians ever tried to write prose?
Failed miserably. No, I haven't.
No? You ever tried to write a song, Richard?
Yeah, once or twice.
Richard did some in an amazing band called Jambi as well. He's now got the Chuck-Ocker, but yeah, he was in the early 90s with his sister, Amy, and then they branched off and did Titters just for a bit of background information. Jane, have you ever tried to tackle a song?
I have a confession. I did actually try to write something that I called the reconciliation rap, and it was pretty appalling.
How does it go?
I don't know. I've erased it from my memory cells and my computer, I think.
And what about Tony on the end there? Have you ever tried to write a song, Tony?
Well, I wouldn't exactly call it a song. I did try to have a little fun with my children and do a bit of a nursery rhyme, but they booed me, so that was the end of it. They booed and hissed and told me to get out of the lounge room, that was it. So I never tried again, never. The closest thing I've ever come to songwriting is actually singing other people's songs, and Richard's.
And what about with your musical, the Sapphires? Are you an integral part of the songwriting for that?
Look, the whole thing with the Sapphires for me was when I initially thought of the idea. It came out of conversations I had with my mother, who in the late 60s travelled over to Vietnam during the war with one of her sisters, and I was just curious to know about her background and her history, and it kind of led to a broader question about the history and background of my elders and other people, and so I just pursued, and Mum initially she couldn't understand why I wanted to know what she was doing when she was 21. And I said to her, look, it's so important to me to understand who you are, obviously for obvious reasons, outside of what you're willing to share in this moment, at this time, because I'm then able to share that with your grandchildren and hopefully, and so on and so on. And she, I persisted with her, And the thing about the music for me is that when I was really little, you know, I grew up listening to, like many of us here, listening to the Jacksons and, you know, the Supremes and all the Motown stuff, you know. And when Mum told me about her singing with her sisters, she sang in a group called the Sapphires, and it was her cousins. So she actually went overseas with her sister. But I said to her, why didn't you go over as the Sapphires? Because they were initially asked to go to Vietnam. And, you know, there were reasons they didn't go. So I, you know, just kept communicating with her a bit more. And I said, look, you know, how do you feel about me writing this as a play? And she kind of laughed at first. And I said, look, you know, I'll have a go at it. Had never written anything before. So I said to her, what do you think would have happened if you'd have gone over as the Sapphires as opposed to just you and your sister? So we talked a little bit about that, and I was taking notes, and I, you know, shuffled them around and came up with this play, and Melbourne Theatre Company heard about it, and we developed it. You know, a lot of people involved, and yeah, you know, it came out of that. And with the music, during the time I was writing it, I remember I was always listening to the songs that I've grown up with and I've loved. So it just sort of gave me a lot of memories of my youth, and it conjured up a lot of images for me, and you know, the emotion through music really drove a lot of it for me, and it still does today. So anything that I write, it really doesn't matter what it is. And as an actor, it's something that I've always utilised as an actor, is music, because it's so integral to who I am and, well, who we are as people. And so that's a tool that I always use, is music. You know, I used to be a track athlete many moons ago, and music again was something that I used to keep myself focused and centered before a big race, and the night before. And so yeah, it's incredible. Music is an incredible tool to use as a writer for me. Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant answer. Now, Tony was just talking a little bit about how, with researching with his mum for the Sapphires, how important. I'm going to ask you the two hip hop artists in the middle. How important is research for you and your music? Do you actually do? Is it a lot of research, or is it just experience and then you write it down?
Well, it depends on what I'm writing about. You know, if certain songs that I take certain factual statements, I have to actually go back in time and say, this is what was said, you know, that particular time, and this is what people done. Then I take that information and then put it in, construct it in a song. Like I said, fit it into 16 bars. But yeah, researching the whole history, you know, my history is more of a passion, and that also helps me write to know where I'm going in the future with the music. So I do research a lot to write.
Yeah, and Tjimba?
Yeah, so with this new stuff that I bring out, it's all experience, but the first album, but the next album I was researching a lot of stuff about black deaths in custody, and I was sort of thinking, you know, nobody's wrote a song about black deaths in custody yet, or there is an awareness about black deaths in custody. So I knew a bit about it, but I didn't know everything about it, and so I was research.
Yeah, so everyone to a certain extent does research. Can I ask you, Richard, who was once a researcher professionally, how important is research for your writing?
It's pretty vital. Like I think for a lot of Aboriginal and Islander people, it's a lived experience that we write about, and our voice has been suppressed in so many different ways that our writing isn't so much a luxury as a duty to show that we are not a problem people, but a people with a problem. So research is vital in the sense of who you're writing about, what tribe, what nation, all those cultural complications, as well as the Western Eurocentric type of research, seeking that out. I mean, I've got a 70-page PowerPoint on Indigenous servicemen and women, and there's You know, there's things like, have you drunk too much again, darling? Now behave yourself. There's things like over 22 Aboriginal and Islander men fought in the Boer War, and probably a lot more. And it's an unknown thing in Australia that these people contributed to the cultural fabric of Australia as we know it now, despite having no rights, despite having, in many cases, no pay. There were 4 trackers that were dumped over there. They were taken over there to track the boar, and they brought the horses home but left the trackers there. Things like that. So I think research is vital, but I think what happens when we research our own mob is we humanise what has been dehumanised. The history is personal to us. Our research is personal to us. It's a lived experience. Beautiful answer. Jane, can I ask you about research?
Sure. I'm kind of nerdy because I love research, but I'm no historian, and particularly this latest play that I'm writing, First Contact, I've read a lot of books about First Contact, obviously, but of course they're all written from the non-Indigenous point of view. So, as Richard said, I have to kind of read between the lines and humanise those experiences that are written from the non-Aboriginal point of view, and reimagine what I think would be the responses of Aboriginal people going through there. And, you know, that's why I've got my guys in suits as the sort of elder statesmen. They're the politicians of the era. And I wanted to turn all those concepts of savagery and not being civilised on their ear, and so they're making their observations of the people on the boats, making those kind of observations about them. So, yeah, obviously it's reimagining, because there's nothing written down really from the Aboriginal point of view of 1788. But I've tried to put as much factual detail in as possible.
Thank you. Now, the nitty-gritty questions. I was on this panel once, and it was called "Who Got the Joke?" and it was a comedy kind of panel, but it was really about who do you write for. So, because I'm sure you've all experienced at certain points, either as an audience member or as a playwright or a director. Sometimes if there's a bit of comedy in your play, some people laugh and some people don't, and sometimes it's the black fellas get the joke and the white fellas don't, or vice versa. So starting with you, Tony, who do you think, when you put pen to paper or computer to finger, whatever you call it now, who do you actually have in your mind?
Yeah, look, when I write something, unless I've been asked to write something specific, I write for myself. Because, look, you know, for those of you who don't know, I'm new at this game as a writer, and you know, everything that I do, I'm learning, and I will continue to learn 30 years from now, if I'm around that long, hopefully. So, you know, when I write now, I'm writing for myself in order to, I guess, to be perfectly honest with you, to better myself. When I started out, I've been an actor since I was 19, and when I started out writing, it was, you know, it was out of frustration, really, because the roles were few and far between for an actor, full stop. But if you're a black actor, it's even less. And you know, there's a little bit of frustration involved there when I started, and I just thought, well, what better place to start from than my own family? And so, you know, I continue to do that, and in doing so, I like to think that I create a voice for my people in one way or another. You know, it was about, you know, we often talk about positive role models, and you know, not having enough of this and not having enough of that. And, you know, I got sick of the sound of my own voice complaining. I just decided to get up and do something. There was no point in me complaining about it if I hadn't actually made the attempt to create something that I wanted to see. So that's what I did with the Sapphires, and that's what I continue to do. You know, I turn, you know, as a young boy, I would turn on the television, and the only role models that I had, that I can remember, were the West Indian cricket team. And, you know, they were fabulous role models for anybody, but particularly somebody of colour, if I can put it that way. But I mean, really, that's all I could go by. And then there were the Jackson 5 cartoons and Fat Albert, and, you know, all these caricatures of black people, what white people think we are like all over the world. So, look, you know, I write as best I can from my heart for myself, and in the hope that people will find what I find funny humorous as well. And I try not to digress from who I am and where I come from, and keep the sensibilities of being an Aboriginal man in this country within my work, within the context of my work, and hopefully people will get it. And at the moment, so far so good.
That's what the guy said falling out of the aeroplane. So far so good. Patrick, do you want to just answer?
Yeah, well, good answer. So how am I supposed to follow that? Yeah, no, well, I do. Like we said the earlier part with our session, that I do write for myself, and I understand what Abala is saying about writing specifically. Like, I do write jingles as well, and I've tried writing, you know, because people say that music, when your album, you should have a certain format. You know, you have to do a song for the clubs, you have to do a song for the ladies, you have to do, and to me, personally, this is just me. When I do that, it feels like I'm forcing the writing. And when I force it, I don't feel it as much, and I don't really, when I put it out there, I don't really like to listen what I put out there. And I believe that if I'm not 100%, you know, into what I've just written, my heart is not in there, I will not put it out. So I always write for myself.
Well said. Jim?
I was the same, yeah, what I said before to you. I wrote for myself, but yeah, what Uncle was saying too is hopefully the crowd and people out there understand what I'm writing, and you know, so I'll write for myself, but hopefully it gets across to people, and yeah, it is.
Richard?
I write from a lot of different places. When I wrote a play called Conversations with the Dead, which I rewrote as a feature script, which might be getting up in the next little while. And I wrote that because I'd investigated a lot of deaths in custody, and I'd seen the world through a mother's tears in a lot of different ways. And I remember I wrote that, and I assembled and wrote that in 2.5 days, and it had more dialogue than King Lear, and that's because I talk a lot. But it was quite a. I guess I was writing for the dead then, and writing to the families. But I believe that when you've got art, you've got voice, and when you've got voice, you've got freedom, and with freedom comes responsibility. And we have the duty as Aboriginal and Islander people to facilitate the voice of our people, because we've had so little voice. So I write for our mob, I write for me, and this last thing I'm writing is I'm writing it for my kids, really, because there's a lot of stories there that they won't get to hear. So, and there's so much negative gossip getting around the community about each other. I thought I'd write down some positive things for my kids. And I put a few heroes in there too, people I consider heroes, people who, when I first hit Fitzroy when I was a 13-year-old, maybe a little bit younger or older, I'm not sure, the truckie that dropped me off, he said, "The Abos are down there," and he pointed to Fitzroy. And I walked into the park, and what I seen was uncles and aunties and extended family, and white fellas had crossed the road. They were scared of us. The parkies looked after me, and then they sent me around to your mum, Auntie Eleanor. Oh, yeah. And she gave me a big cuddle and put me on to finding out about my family. And that's my art, and my heroes is people like that, people who are the fabric of our culture and society. I write for them too.
Beautiful. Jane?
Look, the first play I wrote, Stolen, was commissioned by Ilbidri, and it was a great privilege, but also, as Richard said, a great responsibility to write that, because I'm not a member of the stolen generation and neither is my mother. So how do you give justice to those people who are members of the stolen generation, especially when you haven't had that experience yourself? But for me, my primary audience is always an Aboriginal audience first and foremost, and it's for non-Aboriginal people to play catch-up, you know? I mean, being bicultural or multicultural, as many of us are, having mixed heritage.
Sounds pretty kicky, doesn't it, bicultural? G'day, I'm bicultural.
Yeah, but, you know, we have to exist, you know, we exist in a non-Aboriginal world as well, but our writing does educate a non-Aboriginal audience, and so that is one of the responsibilities of the writing, but it shouldn't be our own, it shouldn't be the foremost responsibility of our writing. It's about telling our stories our way, and so, yep.
Oh, thanks. Brilliant answer. We've got a brilliant panel here, haven't we? Wish I was writing this down. Because someone said to me years ago, and I always thought it was quite a funny question, but they said, if Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history is oral, then why do you write everything down? Like I can recite a whole play to myself, you know? And I just wondered about that question for years, and I just wondered, what do you think of that? You know, because we are from an oral tradition, an oral history, our people, an oral culture. What do you think about that? What issues does that pose to you as creators, as writers, when you have to turn that oral history and culture into the written word? I'll start with you, Tony.
Well, history and culture is yeah, it's oral. It's you know, it's a visual thing as well. And in this day and age, you know, I mean, it's the logical thing is to be able to express yourself in many different formats in many different ways as you possibly can, in order to get the story that you're telling out there too. Like, you know, for me, I have this, you know, the Sapphires was a grand vision. I had this big vision, and the first thing that I attempted to do with it was to write a feature film. Bearing in mind I'd never written anything, but it was the images were so strong, and the images of the stories that you get told are so vivid, and throw in the mix music, and it just creates these emotions along with it. Then for me to put it on paper is a way for me to get it out, you know, and get it down there and get it into some type of format whereby we can then create something, we then can create that vision, and then in the hope, for me anyhow, in the hope that it reaches the masses, that it touches a lot of lives, not just Aboriginal lives, but because when you do that in a format that many other people outside our culture, you know, fully understand, then you're really saying something. If you can do that, this is my personal opinion. If you can do that, then you're really doing stuff. You know, I mean, I noticed there's a couple of really well-respected, you know, practitioners in the audience, and you know, with some of their work, they've truly reached the masses and maintain the integrity of who we are as people in a format that most people have grown up with, and that's the way. I think that's the way to really be able to express who we are and to go into the homes of people. So to write it down, to put it on paper, as opposed to talking about it, then, you know, it's on the radio or just communicating like this, and to see it, you can really get the, you know, it's really tangible for me. But first, you must put it on paper.
Patrick, would you like to comment?
Yeah, very tough question. Sitting here thinking about it, as I know, like Torres Strait culture, as I mentioned, our history and events is passed on by music and dance and song, and that's how we relive those events. For my culture, that's how it's always been passed on, and I believe that's how it always will be passed on. But like I could say, yeah, you know, to put it in another format for everybody else who doesn't understand what the dance or that song means. And some stories are too great to actually sing it out. For instance, a life story of a person needs to be written as an autobiography, you know, or biography for people to know this life of this person. You can't sing and dance that. You can sing stories about particular events of that person, what they did at one point in time, but a whole story like that, it's, yeah, they're both very important, I believe, you know, writing it down so it is documented for the people who don't understand, like I said, what the dances and the songs mean.
Why do I write things down as opposed to oral history? Because the same reason white fellas don't wear pantaloons anymore.
Good answer.
Because our culture is not a static thing. Our culture is a living, breathing entity. And the historical is so important and vital. It's who we are. You know, we've been socially engineered to the point where we were, you know, subhuman in legislation, policy and attitude. And we fought against that. And we fought against that using our art. Our art was our saving grace. It facilitated the voice of 500 different Aboriginal tribes. Everybody thought we all did dot paintings. You know, we don't. Everyone thought we all dance the same. We don't. The way some mobs sing to the land is different. They have different names for the lands. As you know, as a school that I work with, and they come up, and it's on my country. You know, on my Miringyay, you know, my country. And they said, oh, we got, you know, an Aboriginal came to the school. I said, oh, fantastic, you know, where is he from? Queensland. I said, I come to the school every day to pick up my kids, you know. And he wasn't Aboriginal, this fellow, he was PNG doing Aboriginal dances from Queensland. So, culture is a living, breathing entity. I write it down because that's the way I communicate, the same way I drive a car. I drive a car because I have to get from point A to point B. It's a tool. It doesn't mean that I'm any less of a cultural man. In fact, we're having a big day down my country soon where we're reinstating some ceremony. And I won't tell you what the ceremony is, but you're going to cry a lot. Nah, gammon. But we're going to have a ceremony. It's going to be fun, and it's a celebration ceremony. It's nothing about noble savage or standing on one leg in the sunset pointing wisely. It's simply about being human and reinstating part of our cultural shape. And, you know, that's it. It's like, it's there. Use it, make it better, move forward.
Good answer.
Thank you.
I remember hearing an elder say, oh, white fellas don't believe anything until it's written down, in terms of the truth. And I thought, well, you know, so that negates the whole of an oral tradition, which is very annoying. But I suppose, you know, I agree with what everyone else has said, but it's also, you know, it does have a wide reach when you write it down. So, you know, I was just in LA 10 days ago, and people there can pick up a play or a book or a novel and read it. And although it's specific to Aboriginal culture, the stories, there's a universality to it too. So, so that's a great reason to write things down. And I was going to say something about the great thing about theatre, one of the great things about theatre too, is that not only is it visual as well, and there's a musicality to it, and you have sets and all of that, but also the non-verbal gestures, because they're, and the stuff between the lines is really important too, I think, in expressing our stories. So, you know, again, it's always a privilege when you have Aboriginal actors and directors and things who can take a story and put that richness into the story as well, because there's so much more than just the words.
Exactly. It's great actors like Tony Briggs. Now, on a lighter note, I want you all to think about and tell us, what, as performers and playwright, director and poet and musician, what is the one experience, greatest experience you've ever had, as, say, for you, Tony, as a writer or performer?
Well, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is one of the first times I got to perform on stage with an all-black cast, and with a large cast on a major stage. You know, the first time I performed on a stage was with Oodgeroo, so you know, that was a major experience. Obviously, it was the start of my career, but this particular experience was really special because, you know, I just I'd never had it as good, you know, up to that point. And I just felt part of, I felt validated in a funny kind of way, you know. I just stepped on stage immediately. They went, "Hey brother, you know, welcome." You know, it was a really special moment. It was Corrugation Road for Black Swan, and that show, you know, was just. I was only talking about it yesterday. It was just it's an extraordinary piece, so yeah, that really that's the one thing, that's the one experience that really sticks out clearly in my mind as the most exciting moment.
That's great. I love that play.
Yeah.
As well. Patrick?
Greatest moment is when I found out, like, you know, I went down to do my first show in Brisbane and stepped on stage and everybody knew my song. I'm like, really? All the way from a remote island in the Torres Straits, and it's really remote. I mean, internet, I didn't even have internet then. And to get our stuff leaked out by somebody else, you know, down the mainland, and come down and find out that they're listening to my music, I was like, wow, I can really do this. And from then on, it's just been so many great experiences. I think another one that stood out was the first time I walked into a recording studio. I didn't have a recording studio, it was just a home studio. When I saw this, I'm like, I can live in this studio. I mean, I would live in the studio if I have an opportunity. And everything, I've never looked back from that. So there's too many to name, but those are two that comes to my mind right now.
They're deadly too. Tjimba?
Same as Paddy, I've got a few too. But my favourite has always been there with my dad, and because he played with a fair few bands, and Blackfire, Colourstone. So growing up, I was always there with Dad in the background, or in the back, listening to, falling asleep to the music or whatever. And but the first time I ever got on stage was at the old tennis centre, which is now Rodlave Arena. Right? And I got up on stage with Carlos Santana, and that was the best experience of my life, because everybody knows Carlos. And Dad come back, they did their tour, Blackfire did the tour around Australia, and then Dad rang up in Sydney and said, "Son, do you want to play the didge on stage with Carlos? And we're going to play with him as well, and you can play various instruments in as well." So I was like, yeah, what the hell? This is crazy. Man. But yeah, that was my favourite. But and also, yeah, rocking the shows with the international artists, which is, I'm really proud of them, you know, getting out there with my music. So yeah, that's the coolest experience. Right?
Did you tour with 50 Cent? Was it?
Oh, we did Melbourne with 50 Cent. Yeah. It would have been good to do a tour, but we were just starting out, so we were just up, you know, and we were still up and coming. So it was just a bit of it was a tool and a bit of networking. So yeah.
Richard.
There's so many moments, isn't there? I can't top 50 Cent or Carlos Santana. Can't even get. I mean, wow, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, Carlos.
You must have hot didge lips. I reckon for me as a writer or as an artist is when you see an actor take your words and bring them to life in ways that you can't imagine. You write it one way and you think you've got it nailed, and all of a sudden they bring it to life and they give it this beauty, this depth. And I remember one night we were having drinks in this little flat that I had, and there must have been about 20 or 30 people in the flat, and I pulled out all this poetry and we passed it around, and everyone was reading poetry, and it was the greatest honour. There was no audience except us to hear people interpreting those words and taking them to another level. Another time is when I was singing a song called Malcolm Smith, which I wrote many years ago, and people translating it into a different language, or you sing it in front of 1,000 people or 500 people or 100 people, and half the audience are singing it. And you know you've done your job because you know the song's gone into people's hearts and lounge rooms, and maybe, just maybe, you might have stopped someone copping a hard time from the system or from someone. You might have squashed a bit of racism, you might have turned a bit of darkness off in their soul. It's those moments. But for me, just recently, I was on stage singing, and there was 3 of my kids in the audience, and I was singing a song called Cry Freedom. And I looked, and the 3 of them, the 8-year-old, the 10-year-old, and the 22-year-old were all singing it. And they were looking at me with such pride that I had trouble walking off the stage because my head was so big. But it was moments like those. So some of it's very deeply personal and individual, and other is that personal collective voice. But I remember when Tony read a poem of mine out called Listen, when we did No Way to Forget and Harry's War as plays, and he was looking for direction, and I said, oh, you do what you want with it. And as an actor, he suddenly had all this freedom to do what he wanted, and he took it to all these places that I'd never dreamed of, and it was exciting, it was exhilarating. And I remember you, when we did Walkabout, which Jane and I knocked up together, probably a bad phrase that, isn't it, wrote together, and you sung Lawbreaker.
Oh, yeah.
It's on YouTube. You should see the way he does it. He's sort of like Australian version of Louis Armstrong. And it was absolutely brilliant because it hammered it home in this way which, again, I'd never imagined. I love setting the words free. I love setting the words free. When they're free, they become something that more than you can imagine.
Thanks, Richard. Jane.
God, it's hard to follow you. But yes, I do love the collaborative aspect of theatre because, as Richard said, when you get actors and directors and all the other players adding all their sort of skills and intelligence to the story makes you look good. And, I keep going back to Stolen. Some ways, it was a profound experience for me. It was a big responsibility and a privilege to write it. So I go back to that play, and it was beautiful to see the actors bring it to life. And it got good reviews, but the most powerful review it ever had and the most profound moment for me was when a woman in the audience came up to me afterwards, Aboriginal woman. I didn't know her. She came up to me, she sort of hung her head in front of me and she said, "You got that right, sister." And that was the most powerful review for me because I felt that I'd
Got it right.
Got it right for her.
They're a brilliant panel. So impressive. All right, we might open it up for questions. If anyone's got any questions to our wonderful panel.
It's not a question, it's actually a comment. I just wanted to say, as an Indigenous artist for about 38 years, that I really, really pay my respect and acknowledge you. And I would say to all of you that your art in writing, poetry, playwright, literature, film, it actually is a testimony and witness to all Indigenous people. It's a storyline of survival. And like Richard, you mentioned that, a lot of young boys and Indigenous young girls as well, when they hear the music or they see the play, life is added unto them and there is that darkness that's turned off and light fills its place. And they're to the children that are down on the riverbanks in Swan Hill and Wamba country and Wurrugaya, the children and the older people that don't get access to coming to places like this. So I just wanted to pay my deepest respect to you. And I think, especially with the hip-hop stuff, my granddaughter's 6 and she's doing it. Swirling around on the floor and really dramatic, really. And can I make one more comment?
No.
And in terms of oral history, the written word is very, very important because my first thing that I've taught my children is all the storylines that I've been given from my mother, and she's got them from her grandmother and grandfathers as well. And then the second thing that comes into place is the artistic interpretation of all of those things. So they orally know their history, but the written word is the greatest legacy that we can give our children today. And it fills in the gaps for some Indigenous children or people who haven't got those oral histories. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the other inspiring moments I had was the play Conversations with the Dead was on, and all these young men come to see it, and they went off and wrote a play called What is a Warrior? And when they wrote the play, they put it on, and the play was their words, their direction. A bloke called John Staley helped them do it. But what they did was absolutely phenomenal. They seen that their healing for the dysfunction in society, their healing beyond the racism, beyond their own scars on their own souls and the scars in their families, their healing was culture. And so the play was all about finding culture. And it came from a poem I wrote called The Dog, where, a long story short, a white fella mucks up and gets slapped, and the person who slapped him says, "What is a warrior?" And so these kids went and wrote this play, and I guess that was another moment which made me realise how powerful that artistic voice is and the responsibility of it.
Rhoda?
Hi, thank you very much, everyone.
I've heard your voice on radio.
Yes, hi, Richard
Hi.
Franklin.
So sultry.
Tony Briggs, this is a question for you two fine young gentlemen. You've both worked in television, both worked with Aboriginal television, but also, Tony, more recently with your production, The Slap, and of course, Richard, with the work you did with Blue Healers and various other serials. Working in mainstream television, do you still find that there's quite a lot of systemic, institutionalised behaviour?
Can I start on that? Because
I know it's a
we've
good
had this
question.
conversation over breakfast when we were doing a tour together, and we'd get really G'd up over and drink the coffee real fast, and then we'd go to work and work with all these kids and love them. But I've won probably 30 or 40 awards, maybe more, around the world. And I've never ever been given a non-Aboriginal script without Aboriginal subject or content matter. So I'm regarded as a black director, except for the few Blue Healers episodes I did. I went and seen a producer about getting a gig on another place, and I'd been topping the ratings, which is a hard thing to do with your show. You've got to tell the story really well. And I went and seen this producer, and he sat there and said, "Richard, television is seen through the eyes of a producer." And I said, "Yes, I've just directed a heap of episodes." So I never said that. I was sort of thinking, where's he going? And he says, "And this producer happens to be white." And so there's this strange racism there as a glass ceiling. It's a phenomenon that Aboriginal women experience all the time. You know, that glass ceiling. You're good enough to be at this level and we'll let you through the secret door, but you really can't get the wealth and power. And it's the same in television in this country. In fact, I think there should be a move by all our greats for a quota of directors, a quota of writers, a quota of producers, a quota of actors. That should be mandatory, and it should be about trying to close the gap, not just in employment, but the more that we're seen, the more we're visible, the more lives we'll save. The less will die in custody, the less will die of third world diseases, the more likely we are to have access to our lands, sacred sites, and the better we'll be able to contribute to the cultural fabric of this nation.
Look, I think it's a good question, Rhoda, because I've worked in television mainstream pretty much since the beginning of my career, and yeah, you know, one of the first jobs I did was Neighbours, and I remember the director on one of the episodes coming up to me and said, "Look, you know, do you mind if we have this particular dialogue in the script?" And I didn't know what he was talking about. I said, "Well, show me what you mean." And he said, "Well, you know, Mrs. Mangles asks Scott if I'm Aboriginal," and in this really kind of, you know, inquisitive, scary kind of way, you know. And I said, "But she's just asking a question." You know, it was the first job I had, and they putting all this stuff onto me, you know, and I was freaked out enough as it was, you know, going into this whiter than white show with blackest face on the screen in the 80s, you know, and I said, "Look, yeah, I'm Aboriginal. That's okay to ask that question." they got so freaked out by it that they kind of stopped shooting for a while to discuss this one line, and in the end they took it out because they were so concerned about being politically correct. And in doing so, they insulted me. And you know, this is the beginning of my career. Now today, a friend of mine who is a really well-respected filmmaker and producer, a white fella, we had this conversation some time ago, and he said, he couldn't believe that there was a show called The Alice, I think it was, and there was an issue, when they were trying to get it up, I'm pretty sure this is how the story goes, when they were trying to get it up and they were discussing with the writer, the network said, well, look, you know, this is a great concept, this is a great show, we like it, we want it, but we can't have black faces on television for the first 15 minutes because we'll lose our audience. Now, for me, and that's fact, to me, that says that there's a much bigger problem than what we see on the surface. It's not just about your average Joe Blow on the streets. It's not just about the producers. It's you know, we're talking about advertising. We're talking about dollars. It's the way they
embedded racism.
Yeah, but it's the way they see how they're going to make their dollars and what they're going to lose, and that we will be the cause of the loss of their income. It's economics, and we've got to look at that. And I agree with you, Richard. I totally agree with you. I've always been on this trip about, you know, everybody coming on board and saying, no, we demand that this happens.
We should strike.
It's the kind of thing that has to be forced. You can't just, you know, we negotiate. People who are on the inside, you know, who are doing it as best they can, and you know, people like, I'm sorry, Rachel, but I have to draw attention to you in the room. People like Rachel Perkins, who are doing remarkable things and dealing with these kind of people. She could, you know, tell you probably a hell of a lot more because she's right in there. And I'm only just starting at that level, and it's, you know, it just blows my mind. It's very subtle though, you know.
Oh, they're good at it.
It's interesting, the quota thing. If you look at a number of the government campaigns more recently, particularly the workplace health and safety campaign that the Gillard government introduced, there are a whole series of television ads as well as radio ads. And they had the Chinese, the African, the Asian, a couple of Middle Europeans, obviously an Anglo, and even a Maori. But there was not one Aboriginal in that ad because Aboriginal people don't work, so therefore they don't need workplace cover. The only recent ad we've seen for smoking was with Elaine Crombie, because they had to have money to do that specific thing. But it's even in the ads. If I sit and scream at the TV every night because I'll turn on the TV and it doesn't matter what the ad is. Every other sector of our society, including the gay and lesbian community, are recognised in ads. But you name me one ad that's just about any sort of merchandise and tell me where the Aboriginal is in that ad.
The only one I can think of is Tommy Lewis, and Tammy as well. But the battle's been going on for a long time. I remember first getting gigs in the Tjimba days, and we'd turn up for a gig and they'd say, where do you want to paint up and dance? And I'd say, well, but I don't dance. I sort of do them sexy dances, but that's between me and who I'm hanging out with. But well, I'm good at it. Ask Johnny. And they expect you to, you fit in. I remember Charmy turns up at this gig and we end up playing with the Scandinavian accordion players. Now, I've got nothing against Scandinavians or accordion players, but we were a bloody rock band with a horn section, you know, like, and here we were on the cultural stage. So I used to begin speeches like this because I got so jack of it. I hope I can still do it. No, I'll just do that.
Richard.
I'm dealing with arts funding at the moment and the systemic institutionalised racism that exists in funding, and I'm wondering if you think, how can we gain control of our own funding so that we don't have to go through this patriarchal systemic system. I feel like I'm begging. I feel like I'm on the bottom of the rung every time, and that I have to justify my own culture every time I go through this process. It's really demeaning, and I think it's part of what Rhoda was talking about. Do you think we'll see a day when we control our own funding streams for our own visual and performing arts culture?
I think that there's a whole new voice coming through. I remember talking 20 years ago to a heap of Koori kids. There was a big mob in year 8, less in year 9, 1 or 2 in year 10, 1 in year 11 and 1 in year 12. And they got me in, I was investigating deaths in custody to be a role model for these kids. I said, what do you want to do when you get out of school? It was absolute silence. No one had a vision beyond, they were in a survival mode, they were in victim mode. One young girl said, I want to work in welfare, because all her role models were welfare. And the year 12 girl said, I want to work with children. What I hear now though, when I go to leadership places, I hear kids saying they're going to be some type of ologist that I don't even know what it means. It's like a $5 word at a witchy proof. They're just these career pathways that are just going through the roof. It's exciting. I see all this incredible voice. So young artists coming through singing about subcultures and maintaining themselves as what they perceive as warriors in their cultural shape, and still honouring people like me. I'm filled with hope and passion. They're going to be making films, they're going to be creating funding structures that we can't even begin to imagine. And they're going to cross the cultural abyss. They're going to build a bridge over it that we could never build. The future belongs to them, but all we've done is set up a framework. They're going to extend that framework, they're going to fill in the walls, they're going to decorate the halls with culture beyond anything we can imagine. I think there'll be a day when Aboriginal art, Aboriginal voice will be an integral part of the cultural fabric of Australia. I believe the vision for victory is one day I'll walk down the street and I'll have a white person say Narangwa, hello in language, not because they have to, not because they want to, but because it's part of their cultural makeup. So I see hope. I believe we've already won, and the white fella just has to put down the racist gun.
Anyone else want to, any of the boys or Jane want to contribute?
About funding?
Yeah.
It's hard because when I do stuff, I'm one of those workers where if I need something done, I do it right there and then. And I went and applied once for funding, got knocked back. They said, oh, if you do get successful, you have to wait for this long, and then you got to go through this process with the hope that you might get this sum of money. I was like, oh, no, stuff that, I need it now. So I went out, made takeaway containers all around my island, went to sell food, went out crate fishing, put my money together in a month, did my album. So I was like, well, it depends on the scale of what you need and what you want. I mean, it's there for me at this point, like, I know that's one avenue, but I don't always rely on that as the only way to go. I like to keep my options open and say, okay, I might have some friends who wants to invest in me and do this. I might, if I need something on a small scale, I go out and get it myself. But that's just me.
No, I just think, it's a similar kind of thing. It's a really hard question. I think at the end of the day that all we can do is create the works of art whereby they have got no choice but to take on board what we are offering, and if if that's not the case, then you just have to persist and persist and persist. I mean, look, like I said, it's a hard question. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. So that's all the only reason I say that is because that's what I've done myself, and something gives in the end. You get something happening, and then you just keep going, keep going, keep going. Sorry, brother, I really don't know. I don't know.
Oh, can I just say a quick yarn? Richard reminded me of. When I was young, I was at uni and I didn't have any money, and this girlfriend said to me, "You should try modelling." I was like 5'8", 8 stone. You should try modelling. So she'd done a little bit of modelling herself. So she sent me this. She saw this ad in the paper. She sent me off to the appointment. It was in Paran, and I walked into the office and I said to the girl, "I'm here to see Mr. Smith, whatever his name was, the modelling guy, agent." And she said, "Oh, you can go in now." And I walked in and he started laughing. And I know, and I was like, What was that? And he said, oh, no, it's just ironic because we're looking for someone to sell white goods. That's a true story. So I didn't get the job. It's a true story, Tony.
Richie talked about coming from a non-Aboriginal background, but I started studying tertiary education in the 70s, and I've always loved Australian studies and history, and I've found that now I've re-educated myself and I'm back at uni. I didn't finish in the 70s, but in those areas there was virtually no Aboriginal history. Having got back into tertiary studies in the last couple of years and doing it full time and enjoying it, there's a dearth of stuff there, and I think that's very, very hopeful, because it's available to us to be re-educated in a history that was denied us as a kid growing up, because it just wasn't in the textbooks, which was a very, as we all know, a very biased and conservative and totally unjust version of history. And yeah, there is hope, because there's stuff out there that I'm very excited about to learn that I haven't learned, and I'm a mature age student.
Yeah, well said, thank you. And now, please put your hands together and thank this amazing panel.
Legends.